With the basic Garmin 300XL familiarization series complete, we'll now turn our attention to IFR procedures. If you are new to the 300XL and haven't viewed the previous series on basic operations, please do so before moving on to advanced navigation topics. In this episode, we'll take a look at RNAV GPS approach programming and what to expect on both a full and radar vectored approach. We'll demonstrate a course reversal and published hold and discuss the missed approach procedure. You'll get an introduction to how to configure the GPS and better understand the logic behind it, as we illustrate the process step by step in the airplane. Please note that the information presented herein is general in nature and not represented to be complete. The information herein shall not be considered adequate for proficient use of the GPS under instrument flight rules. Viewers must obtain training from a qualified and experienced instructor in the use of this equipment and shall refer to the Garmin GNC 300XL Pilot's Guide for details on the proper operation of the GPS. The aircraft we will be using is equipped with an IFR certified installation of the GNC 300XL, which includes a remote CDI indicator and combined annunciator switch panel. Be certain to check your aircraft's POH for the approval type and limitations associated with your particular installation. For the in-flight demonstration, we will be using the RNAV GPS runway 27 approach, Palatka Municipal Airport, identifier 28 Juliet. Let's take a minute and look it over. The approach layout is typical of many GPS approaches that utilize the T configuration. The initial approach fix on the north side is Zodal intersection, while the straight-in initial approach fix is Tochi. Nidre is the final approach fix, and note the step-down fix at Hurv, which is 2.9 miles from the runway. LNAV minimums for our Category A are 460 feet MSL, which gives a height above touchdown of 426 feet. The missed approach procedure takes us straight out to Fikok intersection, where we can fly either teardrop or parallel entry. An approach can be loaded into a route at any time in one of two ways. It is important to understand that the GNC 300XL requires an airport to be the last waypoint in a route before approaches may be selected and added. Approaches may also be selected and added with an active direct-to-destination airport. The first method to add an approach is to insert it into a stored catalog route through the Route Options menu discussed in a previous episode. The second and more appropriate method is to select an approach from the Approach Select page and insert it directly into the active route, or Route 0. This is the method we will use. The Approach Select page is accessed by pressing the Route key and rotating the large outer knob to move to the second page in the Route page group. Let's see how this operation is performed by looking at a simple out and back flight to Palatka Municipal Airport. For this demonstration, we'll create a simple but complete route from Palatka Airport, 28 Juliet, northeast to Kara intersection, and then back to 28 Juliet. Kara has been intentionally selected as it is not a part of the instrument approach procedure and would represent the final en route waypoint of a trip prior to the destination. We have already entered the waypoints into the active route, which has a departure airport, en route fix, and destination airport. To select and load an approach procedure, use the large outer knob to move to the Approach Select page. A list of available approaches will be displayed for the destination airport. Press the cursor key twice and highlight the desired approach, in our case, the RNAV runway 27 at Palatka. Press the Enter key. If the procedure has more than one initial approach fix, a list of available IAFs will be shown. Because we plan to do the full approach from the north, we will select Zodal intersection and press the Enter key. Let's see what happened to our route. The destination airport is now replaced with the approach fixes, commencing at the initial approach fix we specified, Zodal. Note that our last en route fix, Kara, remains in the route. Once we cross Kara, the GPS would then automatically sequence to Zodal. It is always a good idea to verify the sequence of approach waypoints matches what is shown on the approach plate. You will notice that the step-down fix between the final approach fix and missed approach point, namely Hurv, is not included, so we will need to execute the descent to MDA once we cross the 2.9 nautical mile fix from the runway. The last fix in the route will be the missed approach holding waypoint. With the approach loaded and proceeding toward Kara intersection, ATC clears us direct to Zodal and for the RNAV GPS runway 27 approach at Palatka. From the active route, we'll execute an en route direct to Zodal by pressing the cursor key twice and highlighting Zodal. Then, press the direct to key followed by enter at the confirmation page. The 300XL will then automatically display the CDI page with the direct Zodal information. At this point, I will normally return to the active route page, which is where I can monitor the waypoint sequencing throughout the approach. Okay, let's take a look at the actual cockpit indications after proceeding direct Zodal. We'll use this composite blackboard to illustrate step by step how the approach is flown and what the pilot will see. The approach plan view is in the upper left, showing the aircraft's position in red. The GNC 300XL display will be shown underneath using either the active route display or the CDI nav page shown here. The remote CDI indications will be shown in the lower right of the blackboard. In this case, we have set the direct course of 078 and the CDI shows the course slightly left with a 2 flag. The direct to course was given to us on the CDI page when we executed the direct to function, along with the distance, at this point about 11 miles west of Zodal. Above the CDI will show the remote annunciator and switch panel, which is required for an IFR approved installation of the 300XL. There are several different versions of this panel, so yours may be slightly different, though the nomenclature should be the same. In our example, the GPS approach annunciator shows ARM, while the sequence switch is set to auto. Let's take a closer look at this panel as we work our way towards Zodal before beginning the approach. The 300XL works in conjunction with the external switch and annunciator panel and the external CDI for GPS approaches. Starting from left to right, the message and waypoint indicators provide a visual alert from the GPS to inform the pilot of a system message or waypoint arrival, respectively. System message alerts are viewed and cleared by pressing the message key on the GNC 300XL as described in a previous episode. The waypoint arrival annunciator is a very helpful aid during the approach. Approximately 15 seconds before reaching the turning point for each waypoint, the annunciator will flash continuously. This will coincide with a flashing next desired track alert on the CDI page as a reminder to set the next course. I think of the flashing light as my get set cue. At about 2 seconds from the computed turn anticipation point, the light will glow steadily to indicate the pilot should begin the turn to the next track. A solid waypoint light is my go cue. The GNC 300XL's turn anticipation feature automatically computes when to begin your turn to the next leg of a route. It takes into account the ground speed and angle between the two legs to come up with a smooth curved flight path to help avoid overshooting. As we stated, the waypoint light begins flashing about 15 seconds prior to the turn anticipation point, and then glows steadily as a cue to begin the turn. During the maneuver, the CDI guidance will be along the computed arc joining the route segments, shown here by the dotted line. The to from flag will flip momentarily as the aircraft passes the abeam point to the waypoint. It is important to note that turn anticipation is not provided for fly over waypoints or when the GPS sequence switch is set to hold, which prevents sequencing to the following waypoint. Also, if the GNC 300XL determines a bank angle of more than 25 degrees would be required along the curved segment, a steep turn ahead message will be issued 90 seconds prior to arrival at the waypoint. The GPS approach switch is used to arm or deactivate an approach and indicates the approach phase status with either arm or active annunciations. The arming of a selected approach is automatic when within 30 miles of the destination airport. At this point, the unit will provide a smooth transition from the en route 5 nautical miles to the terminal 1 nautical mile CDI scale. Once armed, pressing the switch will deactivate the approach and set CDI scale sensitivity to 1 nautical mile. A deactivated approach may be re-armed at any time prior to reaching the final approach fix by pressing the switch again. As the aircraft approaches 2 nautical miles from the final approach fix inbound, the approach annunciation will automatically switch from arm to active if all required conditions have been met, including the GPS sequence switch is set to auto for auto sequencing, The FAF is the active waypoint, and RAIN will be available throughout the approach. Once an approach activates, CDI scaling will smoothly transition from 1 nautical mile to 0.3 nautical miles for the final approach segment. If an approach does not activate by the final approach fix inbound, then you are not authorized to continue. The last annunciator switch is the GPS sequence switch, which is equivalent to the modern-day suspend function. In the auto mode, the GPS will sequence automatically through the waypoints in the route. As each waypoint is crossed, the next waypoint will become the new active 2 waypoint. This is a typical mode of operation. However, there will be times when you will want to prevent auto sequencing, as we'll see in this and future presentations. The hold mode stops sequencing and uses the current active 2 waypoint as a navigational reference. In addition, the pilot can set any desired course on the OBS or HSI and navigate to or from the waypoint along that selected course just as if it were a VOR. Examples of situation requiring the use of the hold mode include radar vectors to the final approach course, procedure turns, and some types of missed approach procedures. One very important operational characteristic that you must keep in mind is that when you switch back into the auto sequencing mode from the hold mode, the GNC 300XL will capture the current course setting on the OBS or HSI. It will then provide guidance to the waypoint along the course until the waypoint is reached, after which auto sequencing will be fully restored. We'll introduce several examples of the use of the hold mode as we illustrate the approaches. Okay, with a better understanding of the GPS annunciator switch panel, let's fly the full RNAV GPS runway 27 approach into 28 Juliet. Recall that we had selected the approach in the GNC 300XL and were proceeding direct to Zodal. You'll note the approach has been automatically armed by the GNC 300XL as we are within 30 miles of Palatka, so the CDI is scaling to 1 nautical mile. The GPS sequence switch is set to auto waypoint sequencing. As we cross Zodal and each successive waypoint in the approach thereafter, the GPS will automatically sequence to the following waypoint. Within 15 seconds of reaching Zodal, the waypoint annunciator will begin to flash and the CDI page will direct the pilot to set the next desired track, which in our case would be the segment from Zodal to Tochi. You'll notice that the charted course is 182 degrees while the GPS is directing a course of 184. It is not unusual to see slight differences due to GPS variation calculations. When the waypoint annunciator begins to flash, set the next desired track, but do not begin the turn until the waypoint annunciator glows steadily. If you have followed the turn anticipation cues, you should roll out established on the first leg of the approach. The new active 2 waypoint will automatically sequence from Zodal to Tochi. Within 15 seconds of reaching Tochi, the waypoint annunciator will again begin to flash and you will be prompted to set the next course of 274 degrees. Like before, once the waypoint annunciator glows steadily, begin the turn to join the new segment. The aircraft is now established inbound on the intermediate approach segment and proceeding toward the final approach fix, Nidre. Within 2 nautical miles of the final approach fix, the GPS approach annunciator will automatically switch from ARM to active if all previously discussed criteria have been met. At this point, CDI scaling will transition from 1 nautical mile to 0.3 nautical mile. It is critical that the pilot confirm that the approach activates no later than the final approach fix and that no flag is visible on the external course indicator. You are not authorized to fly the final approach segment under IFR unless the GPS approach phase is active. As the aircraft crosses the final approach fix inbound, the active waypoint will advance to the missed approach waypoint, which is the runway. In this illustration, we have used the active route page rather than the CDI page we have been using to demonstrate the difference. Again, the active route page is the one I fly on as it shows me successive waypoints in the upcoming route. In this example, in addition to the missed approach point at the runway, I can also see the missed approach holding point, FICUC, in the sequence. This approach includes a step-down fix, HURIV, along the final approach segment that is 2.9 miles from the runway. As the step-down fix is not in the GPS approach database, we will need to monitor the distance to the runway. Once we cross Hurav at 1,000 feet, we can then descend to the MDA of 460. As we continue to the end of the final approach segment level at MDA, we can monitor the distance remaining to the runway on the GNC 300XL. When the aircraft is within about 15 seconds of arrival at the missed approach point, the waypoint annunciator will begin to flash as usual to alert you. You will see the indicator in the annunciator panel on the left of the glare shield. The light will extinguish as you cross the missed approach waypoint. Now that we've flown a full GPS approach, let's take a step-by-step look at the missed approach segment. It is essential that the pilot understand precisely the GNC 300XL logic to avoid errors that could result in an inadvertent controlled flight into terrain. In this snapshot, the aircraft has just passed the missed approach point, which is the runway threshold. In the upper left is the display from the active route page, still showing the Nidre to runway 27 leg as being active. For comparison, the upper right shows a display from the CDI page of the nav group. Note the from flag on the external CDI in the lower left and the from indication in the center of the electronic CDI shown on the CDI page in the upper right. Also, the ETE calculation has ceased and the distance value is now counting up from the missed approach point. For the RNAV GPS runway 27 at Palatka, the missed approach instructions call for a straight-out climb from the missed approach point direct to the missed approach holding waypoint, Fikuk. Therefore, in this instance, we can initiate the missed approach leg immediately. To begin navigating to the missed approach holding waypoint, just press the Direct To key from either the active route page or the CDI page. The GNC 300XL will then prompt you for the confirmation that you want to proceed direct to Fikuk, which you acknowledge by pressing the Enter key. Course guidance will now be provided direct to the missed approach holding waypoint. Some missed approach procedures call for a climb and/or a turn to a heading or course prior to proceeding to the missed approach holding waypoint. Be certain to comply with all required maneuvers before initiating direct-to navigation to the holding point. As you approach the missed approach holding waypoint, the waypoint annunciator will begin to flash as usual. At this point, we will need to change from waypoint auto sequencing to the waypoint hold mode, commonly known in modern-day GPSs as the suspend mode, or OBS mode. This will hold Fikuk as our active waypoint and allow us to navigate to or from it just as if it were a VOR. To engage the waypoint hold mode, press the GPS sequence switch and note that the hold annunciation illuminates. Because we are still proceeding inbound to Fikuk, the CDI indication shouldn't change in that the needle should be centered with a 2 flag. At this point, we'll note our outbound heading for the hold entry at Fikuk. For a teardrop entry, that would be 302 degrees. Crossing Fikuk, you'll note the 2 from flag switch to from. At this point, we will turn the aircraft to 302 degrees. The distance from Fikuk can be monitored on the active route or CDI page. We can now set the inbound holding course of 092. The CDI indicator will behave exactly as if we were holding at a VOR, and the procedure will be identical. Turning inbound, we will intercept our holding course. Arrival at Fikuk each time will be indicated by a switch of the 2 from flag to a from indication, at which point we will make a left turn to remain in the hold as long as necessary. In the previous segments, we looked at a full approach procedure and the missed approach. Before wrapping up, let's look at 2 variations that cover a radar vectored approach and one that requires a procedure turn or course reversal. North of the approach course on an assigned heading of 270 degrees, ATC has advised us to expect vectors to the RNAV GPS 27 approach. For a radar vectored approach, the loading procedure is the same as the full approach we discussed earlier. With a destination airport loaded, Move to the Approach Select page and choose the approach. I always load the nearest IAF so I can join the approach on a vector to any leg. In this case, we are arriving from the north. I will use Zodal, just as we did for the full approach previously. Verify that the approach status indicates armed on the annunciator panel. ATC next instructs us to turn right heading 180 for vectors to the approach. At this point, it becomes apparent we will be vectored onto the intermediate approach leg between Tochi and the final approach fix, Nidre. Therefore, we can now activate Nidre. From the active route page, select Nidre and press the Direct To key followed by the Enter key to confirm. Next, we will want to put the GPS sequence mode into hold. This is done by pressing the GPS sequence switch and noting the hold annunciation. As the last step in preparing to intercept the leg, we'll set the inbound course as published, in this case 272 degrees. The CDI will now give course guidance to the leg from Tochi to Nidre, just as if it were a VOR course. As we work our way to the approach course on a southerly heading, ATC directs us to turn right, heading 240, and clears us for the approach. At this point, with the intercept to the leg established, we can return to auto-sequencing for the remainder of the approach. This is done by pressing the GPS sequence switch and observing the auto annunciation. One very, very important operating characteristic to keep in mind anytime you switch from the hold back into auto-sequencing mode. Before releasing the hold mode, you must wait at least 2 seconds after setting the CDI course in order for the GNC 300XL to recognize that course. In other words, never set the inbound course while in the hold mode and then immediately switch to auto-sequencing. As you get closer to the approach course on the assigned intercept heading, the CDI will begin to center and you can join the inbound course accordingly. With the aircraft established inbound toward the final approach fix, the remainder of the approach will be flown exactly as we discussed previously. Recall that within 2 nautical miles of Nidre, we must see the approach activate automatically by observing the GPS approach annunciator switch from ARM to active. After crossing Nidre, auto-sequencing will resume just as before. For our final topic, we'll look at how to fly a course reversal or procedure turn on the GNC 300XL. For our example, once again return to the RNAV GPS 27 approach into Palatka. The aircraft is approaching Tochi from the southwest, and we have been cleared direct to Tochi and for the approach procedure. We had previously loaded the approach into the active route just as we've done before, and selected direct Tochi from the active route page. No later than 2 nautical miles from Tochi, it is imperative that the GPS sequencing be taken out of auto-sequencing and placed into the hold mode. If the GPS were to remain in auto-sequencing, then the GNC 300XL will automatically advance to the next approach leg, which is Tochi to Nidre. Because we want to pause at Tochi in order to perform the course reversal, we must press the GPS sequence switch and verify the hold mode prior to reaching Tochi. As the aircraft crosses over Tochi with the GPS sequencing in a hold mode, the to from flag will change to from. The pilot can then set the outbound course of 062 for the teardrop entry. Once the aircraft completes the outbound leg of the entry, the pilot can then set the charted inbound course and begin the turn to intercept. The CDI indications will appear just as they would if the fix were a VOR. With the aircraft established inbound to Tochi, the GPS sequence switch needs to be placed in the auto position to continue with the approach. If additional circuits in the holding pattern are necessary, though, then the switch should be left in the hold mode. Once the aircraft crosses Tochi with auto sequencing enabled, the rest of the approach will proceed exactly as we have shown earlier in this presentation. I hope you found the introduction to instrument approach procedures with the GNC 300XL helpful. This video is by no means complete and only serves as a general overview. Pilots must obtain training from a qualified flight instructor in the use of the GNC 300XL in flight. If you enjoyed this presentation, please like and subscribe to the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you.